Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Mount Olive Baptist Church's Wednesday night series. Our study for this month is entitled Reclaiming Our Story. I am so excited for us to be continuing in this series. My name is Reverend Miracle Worrell Niosi. I serve as the assistant pastor and minister of Christian education at Mount Olive. On behalf of our senior pastor, the Reverend Dr. James E. Victor Jr., I want to welcome you to this series on this evening. If this is your very first time joining us for a Wednesday night series, I ask that you would write in the chat, let us know where you're joining us from, introduce yourself to us. We would love to stay connected to you. Welcome to those watching on Facebook Live and YouTube. If you have any questions as we are going throughout our study, please write in the chat, let us know, and we will answer it to the best of our ability. Tonight, we will continue in our study and with our guest genealogist, Miss Adrienne Abiodun. She has so much passion that she brings to this work. She'll be helping us to dive into our stories a little deeper, understand our stories a little bit deeper, and to help us put some legs to our family roots. And so we are so excited. Before we jump into our discussion for this evening, I invite you to just take a moment, pause with me, and let's just ask God to just prepare us for what we are about to discuss tonight and just open up our hearts and minds. Won't you pray with me? The prayer that I'll be reading tonight is actually written by Howard Thurman. It is entitled, Lord, Open Unto Me. Open unto me light for my darkness. Open unto me courage for my fear. Open unto me hope for my despair. Open unto me peace for my turmoil. Open unto me joy for my sorrow. Open unto me strength for my weakness. Open unto me wisdom for my confusion. Open unto me forgiveness for my sins. Open unto me love for my hate. Open unto me thyself for myself. Lord, Lord, open unto us. Amen. Thank you all so much for joining me in that moment of centering and prayer. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Adrienne Abiodun. Let's welcome her as she comes.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, everyone, for having me back for a second night. I'm really excited to be here. I really enjoyed being with you last Wednesday, and I hope that there was something of value and for all of you, and that you learned something. And tonight, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper. I'm not going to start with any opening questions or feedback yet. I'm going to save that towards the end as it relates to the homework, this presentation, maybe questions from about the previous presentation or a thought, comment, all are welcome. Okay, so today we're going to get into documentary evidence, and I want to share my screen. I apologize, I'm working from two devices right now. So let's see. Okay, again, the information that I am sharing with you, I am pulling from a presentation I give called The State of African American Genealogy, a New Reconstruction Era for Genealogy. So again, we're going to dive into documentary evidence. And record research, okay? Really with this segment, I want us to think about these documents and evaluating the source and quality of information that we look at when we, or are getting from the records when we're looking at them, the same way we discuss oral history and considering who it is that it's providing the information, the source and quality of the information that they're giving to us. So everything I'm touching upon tonight it could be its own 1-hour presentation. For instance, my first key research suggestion for record research is determine how and where you want to organize your research and research findings. So keeping a research log, to track where you're looking for information so you don't waste time repeating those same searches, or if you're collaborating with someone so they know where you've looked. And there are many different research logs. There are people organized in different ways. So again, that could be its own presentation. So we won't get into that a whole lot, but it's just, or try to figure out how you want to organize this, because it gets really big, really massive, really cumbersome to keep up with if it's not well organized. And what we don't want to happen is all your hard research to be lost as you're trying to hand it down to someone and they can't really follow along at what you've done or retrace your steps. Okay, next, identify where the records you need are located, online and offline. We are going to talk a little bit about that. We've discussed compiling birth, marriage, and death records for each direct ancestor for each generation until these vital records are no longer available or accessible. And then we also want to start thinking about collateral relative lines for these same records. If the information we're looking for like, let's say our grandparent, we can't find our grandparents' birth record, but we know they had 5 siblings, you know, maybe we want to pursue one of their records. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Develop an understanding of which record alternatives to pursue. We'll discuss that. And there's going to be overlap between this week and next, because this one is, again, is a very basic, probably top 4 records I'm always looking to get for very early, more modern, more recent family history research. If you are all at that 1870 brick wall and you need to like some really amazing tips at how to get beyond that, we're going to discuss those things more next week. And then evaluate the source and quality of the information that is contained in these records. So there's that. Okay. Locating records. There's online and offline places you can go to get records. I think those of us who have done research for a long time remember, you know, not having as much available online. And then there are those of us who are starting with, oh, this is all here. But really, it's not all here yet still. There's still a lot of information offline, and we need to keep that in mind. Not every record has been digitized. Not every record, there are people who aren't going to want things digitized, like in private collections offline. If you know, for instance, a family member has a family Bible or some other type of record, or just some interesting trove of records their ancestors had, they may not be at a place yet where they're willing to share that openly. But online, this was a question last week. How do I get started? Where do I go? I'm just ready to dive in. For locating records, I highly recommend, and this is what I do. Everything that you see in this presentation is going to be how I approach research. I try to keep it simple. There are like 4 or 5 sites I continuously use over and over and over again. And if I'm researching something new, or I'm not sure where to begin, or if records are available in an area, I will use the familysearch.org, like their wiki. And I'll just type in a location and it'll give me a guide of birth, marriage, death records, courthouses, if there were fires. I mean, it's just a nice way to get familiar with a place. So I highly recommend using Family Search. It is free. Google, of course, if I am researching, again, a place I'm not that familiar with. And Then when I'm ready for, once I have an idea of this is where my records are, or where the records may be, I'll use Family Search to look for those records. Use the card catalog there so you're not just doing global searches. And global searches is that like first screen you land on and it tells you to put in a name and a location. You can really cut down on some time using the card catalog that they have there. And then ancestry.com, I use that a lot. There is a subscription required, so money is involved. MyHeritage is also another website where you can access census records and different documents as well, and a subscription is required for that. And then all of these others here, feel free, you can take a screenshot here, or, you know, that's fine. But a lot of these fall under the ancestry.com family. Fold3.com is for military records, and then there's a lot of newspaper places and state archives and national archives. And then on that offline section, local libraries, I'm always calling them from state to state. Churches sometimes have records that are of use. Cemeteries are great to go into as you start getting further back in time. Those families were buried all in the same place. For online cemetery research, you could use findagrave.com, but they're not all there. I guarantee you, if your family was from the country, I've taken multiple trips to Mississippi, and I'll spend 2 hours in a very rural cemetery attached to a church, and I'll take pictures of all the headstones and upload them to Find a Grave, so it becomes available to people. But there are a lot of cemeteries where this information is offline and you have to go visit. Funeral homes, courthouses, local historical societies, and museums. And the same thing, state archives and national archives. So there are tons of places to locate records, essentially. We're going to talk again about the 4 records that probably need and use the most for each generation as I start my research. And again, we're going to look at some of these. Majority of these come from my family. And we're going to just evaluate the information. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the oral history that, you know, we're going to see how that looks. So this right here is my grandfather's birth record. And if you heard me mention last week a little bit about my maternal grandfather, you will know that there are 2 truths and a lie on this record. Birth records, we usually like to pursue these though, because they are the first record created, you know, to document our existence. They usually tell us the mother and father, and all the information is recorded as close to the time of the actual birth. That's how it should work. And then it tells us who provided the information. So on this record, it looks clean. It's actually a really clean, good-looking document. My grandfather's name was Sam Wilson. What's the name he was born with? His mother was Minerva Jones. But his father was not Tom Wilson. And that's what I mentioned last week. Tom Wilson is a fictitious Black railroad section hand who does not exist as far as I know. There were Wilsons, but I've not found Tom, because my grandfather was born to a white man named James Moffett. So this record is only as good as the information provided by the informant. In this case, there's a midwife down there, and most certainly she was probably there at the time he was born. She went and told them, hey, this is the parents. Maybe they told her to tell him it's Tom Wilson. I don't know. But what we do know, she wasn't there at the time of conception. So, you know, we have to consider these things, like who's providing the information. Look all around the document, get familiar with these. Even if you have these birth records for everyone in your family, I encourage you to just go back and look at them again, and you'll find new things. Okay, this is my grandmother, my maternal grandmother's birth certificate. It is not as nice exactly filled out as my grandfather's birth certificate was. You'll see I've highlighted several sections. And the story behind this one is my grandmother's birthday was August 11th, 1921, as far as everyone in our family knew. So when I requested from the state of Mississippi, the archives, for them to locate my grandmother's birth certificate, because it should be there, they couldn't find it. And I thought, well, not everyone did comply with having a vital record documented at up until certain points in time, and this varies by state. And you can find out this information on that family search wiki, like when general compliance was for birth records in a particular state. But I felt pretty confident that she should have a birth record. Her name was Johnetta Jones. So maybe Johnetta got spelled wrong. I don't know, but I wrote them back and I said, I'd like for you to try to find my grandmother's birth record again, and please look around these dates. And then finally, someone at the archive, and this was a question as well last week, how helpful are people when you contact these archives and things? It depends. It depends on the workflow, how overwhelmed they are. The first person probably did a quick search and didn't even consider some of these other details that I had told them to locate this record. But in this case, if you look at this is missing the name of the child on this record. Clearly, I mean, Willie Jones and Louise King had a child on, according to this document, August 12, 1919, which is 2 years prior to the date I gave them, which is the date my family believes my mother believed her mother was born. But then you'll see the information on here is just really inaccurate. Like, for instance, the age at last birthday is August 11th. Well, August 11th is the day my grandmother was born. But, okay, is it 1919? Is it 1921? Then if you look at the birthplace for Willie Jones, it actually says Johnny Jones. That is what they called my grandmother. She was Johnetta Jones, Johnny Jones. So what they've done now is they put the day she was born, which was August 11th, and her father's age at his last birthplace. They put her name in his birthplace. There's no place in Mississippi named Johnny Jones, that's for sure. And they put her mother's date of birth, it seems, on the date of birth, which is August 12th. Her mother was born on August 12th, 1901. So a lot of details on this record are pretty messy. Now, the midwife and the parent here, Jenny King, is the grandmother of Johnetta Jones. It's not clear to me who gave this information, but maybe they were not as literate. Maybe they misunderstood parts of the form. Another thing on this that was interesting to me, and growing up, I heard, we have some Native American, we have some Indian in our family, we have Choctaw. Well, I don't know. It says here that the community they lived in was Choctaw, Mississippi, which is a small community in Bolivar County. So it's more likely that we weren't Choctaw Indian. They just lived in a community named Choctaw. So you consider the oral history, consider the records, consider the documents, take a close look, and just really pay attention to detail. Marriage records. Marriage records, we want to pursue these for the same reasons. Some marriage records will tell us the parents' names, not all. But if there was a marriage that occurred, it's also just a good way to pinpoint where they were. And keeping a timeline of your ancestors, again, is a whole nother presentation. That could take a whole hour of nice timeline techniques and how we can pull information and look for record gaps using timelines. My grandparents were both born in Mississippi, but they took off part of that migration out of the South, went up to Chicago, made their way to LA, but prior to that, it looks like, or sometime in between living in LA, they made a pit stop in Arizona and got married. So this is their marriage record, which does not include the names of their parents, but it does tell me that they were married in Arizona. This is another marriage record, and this one is for my second great grandparents, Henry Thomas and Celia Robinson. And this one is from 1888. So it's much older. Again, it doesn't tell us the name of the parent. But what's interesting about this record, and why sometimes we want to obtain the marriage record, and if you've been doing genealogy for a while, some of these things may not be done in this order where you're looking for birth, marriage, and death. Usually, sometimes it's backwards: death, marriage, and birth records. But for instance, like I had this record before I had any other record related to this ancestor. So in 1888, which was the furthest back I was able to go, I believed Celia Robinson was Celia Robinson because that's what the record says. So later, I moved on to death records, and I said, well, she wasn't on the 1920 census, which means she likely died between 1910 and 1920. In the state of Mississippi, they didn't start birth record or vital record information and collecting that until about November 1912. So it was really a shot in the dark here, I thought, like to get this ancestor's death record. But it was worth pursuing still, because if she had died anytime after 1912, there was a chance of getting her death record. So on this record, we can see she died 1913 in May, less than a year after these records are being issued. What was phenomenal about this discovery and comparing it to the marriage record was her father's name listed there and her birthplace, which was previously unknown. Otherwise, it's not that great of a death certificate. It's not completely filled out. There's obviously information missing, but we take what we can get, right? So this record allowed me to go further back, but it also caused confusion because if her name was Robinson, why was her father Roberts? Was she really a Roberts? Those names can be interchangeable, but I wouldn't immediately think to look for a Roberts if I had Robinson on the mind. So with this death record, comparing those two, Celia Ann Robinson Roberts, married to Thomas. She was born in Franklin County, Mississippi. This took us further back in time. This is another death record for another second great grandparent of mine. And I don't know, again, I know Virginia has better records than Mississippi, and I'm always so envious of some of the records we have, because with Mississippi, you get a lot of this, and Georgia too. Alabama, I like records there, but like I said, some of these are just heartbreaking because you see the mail coming and you think you're going to get lucky, and you get a bunch of don't know any information. With this particular ancestor, Olivia Jones, again, when we're looking at why wasn't there information provided, she had tons of family. What happened? Obviously I wanted to know who her father was. I wanted to know who her mother was, but I got don't know. With this particular ancestor, there was a shootout in Jefferson County, Mississippi. It was one of the biggest, mass shooting sprees at the time. And it was called the Jones Boys shooting, and they are different accounts from family oral history, right? And so then again, here we're coming in with the oral history that this occurred because Olivia Jones here, as you can see, it says she died from a burn. So it was always told in our family history that she was set on fire. There was something traumatic that happened there. that is something to consider. Her husband, also Alexander Jones, was he served in the Civil War. He was a private scout for one of the Union spies in that area. So the person reporting this information or who showed up to give this may have not provided anything out of protection for this family. So death records, again, are good to pursue. They really help us paint the story. At least they give us a cause of death, which I think is interesting. But in terms of vital information and connecting those dots further back in time, these older records can be kind of spotty, especially for African American families, and especially when it was in the South after war and everything. It's pretty bad. So next record set, I think you guys get the gist of birth, marriage, and death records and the importance of those records for finding and naming parents on them. And again, every generation we're going to pursue those. The next record I utilize often is census records. And census is every 10 years, right? So the census began in 1790. The first census you'll find available mostly to our European ancestors, if we have those in the United States at that time. But Black American people or African American people were not recorded on census records by name until 1870, unless, of course, they were free people of color. They would have been on census records in 1860, 1850, 1840, as early as they were free. That's when they would have appeared. Black people were recorded on slave census enumerations in 1850 and 1860, but usually by their age and by their sex only, not by name. So if your ancestor was enslaved and you know who the enslaver was, you might be able to utilize those census records too. But census records are wonderful because they help construct the whole family. And it gives us, instead of just looking at that birth record information where it's this person and their mom and dad, the census record tells us who was in that household at a certain time. So they're very important to use. Again, you can access these through the National Archives, Family Search for free, Ancestry.com if you have a subscription. But the reason we want to reconstruct whole family sets, and I see a lot of people miss this step sometimes, they'll just go further back on their direct ancestor lines. We want to know who else is available to pursue additional vital records. So for instance, if my grandmother had a sibling, but she didn't, but if she did, and I wanted to find out about their mother's maiden name. Let's say my grandmother's record, her death record or whatnot, or birth record, it doesn't provide the maiden name. Well, they have the same parents. I could then pursue getting the siblings' birth, marriage, death record, whatnot, to see if that names the maiden name of the mother, or just to see how they compare. So it's always a worthwhile exercise to know who to put the whole family set in order, and to be, if you're missing information from those direct ancestors, pursue the other family members. The census records are great for that. Census records can also be tricky though, because yes, it appears we're looking at whole family sets. Each initial enumeration offers a little bit of different information. So you really have to be mindful of that. And you can go online and see what the differences are between each census year on a blank sheet. And I highly encourage that, because it wasn't until I think 1940 where it explicitly states who gave the information in that household. And they did that with a little circle and a little X. So you know if it was the wife, the husband, the child, a neighbor, I don't know, that's really important, because a lot of assumptions can be made by census records. Okay, like this one is an 1870 census, and the little picture I have there is from another genealogist, Nika Smith, Black Pro Gen Live. I love Nika Smith. If you don't follow her, you should. But she's a wonderful genealogist, and she put this in one of her crew chats one time, and it was really funny because if you've gotten yourself to 1870 census, a long time ago, I don't even know that long ago, they used to say, if your ancestor was enslaved and you're trying to work your way further back in time, look for the first nearest white person to that your ancestor in 1870, and that may have been their enslaver, their relative. I mean, but it's not a good practice. It may have worked for some, but it doesn't work all the time. And so for this particular record that I have here, this 1870 census, the individual down here in this box is the first white person next to my ancestor down here in the highlighted area. Yeah, I don't think he was an enslaver. He was just a neighbor. He was just a neighbor. But the interesting thing about this ancestor is that down here, Lizzie Johnson, she had children that were all considered mulatto, and so they were biracial. Their pictures, which I have, just my ancestor is a very fair-skinned man, so he was obviously mixed, but we didn't know who his father was. And the reason I have the box here highlighted, this Clinton Smith up here, is because it wasn't until DNA testing later on that I was able to determine that my ancestor's father was more than likely this man here in the red box. So he's just a neighbor, a household away, but he was not the first white person in the 1870 census to come across. Another thing we have to be mindful of in the 1870 census, particularly, is that they don't explicitly state relationships. And we can get ourselves in a lot of trouble. I mean, the minors in these households are oftentimes considered the children of the individual named as the head of house, but they could be nieces, nephews, cousins, adopted children. They could be all kinds of people. So we really need to keep that in mind with 1870 census. And we're going to talk more about 1870 next week when we want to get past the brick wall. Other census records, there are a lot, not just the population schedules, but there's the, as I mentioned, 1850 U.S. federal slave schedules, the 1860 federal slave schedule, mortality schedules, and agricultural schedules. Some states have some of these, some states don't. So you really need to, again, check back in on that Family Search Wiki or a local genealogical society to kind of get an idea, an inventory of what records are available to you that you'll be able to utilize. So for this one here in this box, I was trying to do this. My ancestor, Lizzie, was not a free person of color as far as I've been able to determine. So I went and I was trying this individual enslaved a lot of people, and I, looking out for the approximate race. She was mulatto too, so there was this tick mark there. But I can't say for sure that that's her. So unfortunately, that's just the way it is if your ancestors were enslaved in 1850 and 1860. This person is not my ancestor, but it's just an example of another census record that was from Mobile, Alabama. This one is in 1850, and it is a mortality schedule. And I like to show these because I want people to understand and know, and this is part of that 1870 thing, you can find documents of people of color. They may have been enslaved, and this might have been the time that they were recorded on a record for the mortality schedule or whatnot. But it's worth looking to see if they had these types of census in the state for your ancestors and if you can find them, depending on where your research is taking you there. But you can see Esther King, she was 48 in 1850, which means she was born about 1802. And she would not have appeared on an 1870 census because she was deceased before then. If she had any children or relatives with that last name King, she could be just an additional indicator. This doesn't really tell us anything about her family, but it's just helpful to see that people are being named people of color on census records prior to 1870. This is another one out of South Carolina. And this man was 102 years old, born in Africa. And this one is another mortality schedule. So if I would imagine at 102 years old, maybe he had a family with that same name, but we know here that he was born in Africa. So anything beyond him is going to be across the water, his parents' names and whatnot. Just to keep that in mind, because for instance, I have a client and she's very advanced. She has these South Carolina roots. And, some of the research goals, for instance, are look for the siblings of this person, look for the, she wants to build out these whole family sets. But siblings are an assumption. Not everybody had siblings. Not everybody had children. But if you're here from that person, obviously they had children, but that person, my mother may not have had siblings, and her mother may not have had siblings. So sometimes we're looking for things that are not there. And then also we want to trace things further back in time. Some people arrived, if we consider the slave trade was going on for hundreds of years. And so some people may have arrived in the Americas very early, and some of them may have made the trip over here a little bit later, which would be the case here. And we don't know when he was brought into the United States. We just know that he died here and he was born in Africa. Okay, this is another record. This individual out of Fayette, Mississippi, is actually a cousin's relative, and we've been trying to figure out if I relate to her, which I do not think I do. But on this census record, which is in 1880, it tells us that her place of birth was on the ocean. So she was born on a slave ship, and her parents were both born in Africa. We've not been able to go beyond Mary Thompson in this particular record, but again, census records are where we want to start digging into for vital information about the person, their place of birth, their parents' place of birth, and so forth. Great records. Okay, I'm going to pause there for today, and I just want to go over some of the basics of that information and the homework actually for this coming week. So, and I understand many of you may not do this homework, but I hope that you'll attempt to or try, because like last week we learned that there was someone who didn't know where their relative was born. And this is how you do it. This is how you get back. It's nothing super complicated, but we need to take the steps. So for this week, I wanted you to research where and how to obtain an original birth record. And you don't have to try to order it, but if it's online, great. Like, know that information, that it's online. If you have to obtain it by writing a vital, archive, library, wherever, that will be important. And then also, I want you to go back and look at the vital records that you may already have, or those census records that you may have already looked at in like 1870 and stuff. And I just want you to consider the containers of information and whether you've made any assumptions based off of that information in those containers. Because it's always nice to go back with fresh eyes, and I do it repeatedly, especially using DNA, because I'll find a match, for example, that will prompt me to go back to that record, and then I'll discover that their ancestor was living nearby or something like that. So I'd really love to hear, like, if some of you have already done some of this, I'd love to hear your feedback now. And I'd love any questions or comments or anything like that. So I'm going to open the floor. We have about 20 minutes open. So I'm going to open the floor for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
So if anyone has any questions, at the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says reactions. You can click that and then click where it says raise your hand. And then you'll pop up to the top of our screen. If you don't see that, just kind of wave, and then if your video is on, we'll see you and we'll call on you. So if you have any questions, I have tons of questions. So I know some of you have at least one question. So you all go ahead and jump in before I start asking my tons of questions. Go ahead, Brother Jonathan McMullen, please unmute yourself and go ahead and share your question or comment. You turned off your video. At the bottom, you should see where it says mute or unmute. You just click that. The bottom left of your screen, you see like a microphone where it says or unmute. You just click that to unmute yourself. And while he's figuring that out, anyone else have a question, a comment that want to go next? Okay, Sister Elora, oh, Brother Jonathan is unmuted. Okay, go ahead, Brother Jonathan, and then Sister.
Okay, yes, thank you. And thanks to the presenter. One of the things that I found interesting is that I came up against the 1870 wall. And I'm certainly looking forward to getting into the things that outlined for next week. But the question that I have relates back to I recognize that there is a certain amount of information that's incorrect. And in fact, basically most things that I've read have said that some of the information may be correct, some may not be correct. And the first thing that I came across that was incorrect was my mother's name. And that just threw me for a loop. And how do I get out of that? Especially since my mother's dead and none of my siblings and no one has never heard that name before.
So where did you come across the name being incorrect?
In the census.
In the census?
Yes.
And was it something wildly different than her?
Yes.
And so how do you know it was her?
Well, because listed above her is her brother, George. Listed below her is her brother, William, all of whom I know, and I know that she's the second child.
Okay. So with that being said, have you used, and I'm not sure when your mother was born, but would a birth record be available for her, and have you tried to get it, or?
Yeah. That's where, based on what you talked about tonight and going forward to next week, that's where I'm going to be digging deep into this next week to figure this out.
Right. So, like I said, although I presented this in the order of birth, marriage, and death records,
Yeah, yeah.
usually we start with oral history. I'm Adrian, and because my mom said I'm Adrian, and then nobody's looking for my records right now. But then we die, and people get the death record, and then we want to go backwards in time. So then we start looking for marriage, and then the birth records. In this case, your mother went by a name that is different than what you've seen on the census, wedged in between her siblings. That should be her. The age looks the same. I assume you've tried to obtain her birth record under the name you thought she used, or the name she used, but not that one on the record. So if records exist for that time frame, yes, you should try to pursue and give all those details. When I write the vital records and I fill out their forms, I give them clues and details like, this is what we knew her as,
Okay.
but this is what I found on the census. I'll print out the census sheet. I'll give it to them just so they can see things like it might have been one of her relatives on that page who was an informant, anything to help them out. I'm always more information is better. You could also obtain her Social Security original application form if you haven't already gotten that, because even though that information is secondary, she is stating what someone told her. I am so-and-so, my parents are these people. You can still kind of see what she was calling herself on these records. And I assume you probably have seen her name in the Social Security index and stuff, but I would be very interested in hearing how that works out. Like, what if you're able to find her record based off of these name discrepancies? Yeah.
And thank you. This threw me for a loop because I was working to learn the story of her mother, who was also a mulatto. And in fact, she could have passed for any white American. That's just how mulatto she was. But then I ran to this brick wall and I could never leap to my grandmother to find her story. So I appreciate it and thank you very much.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Adrian, so Brother Jonathan mentioned the term mulatto and you mentioned it as well. I was looking at a census a few years ago and I saw my great aunt's name and I met her in person. So to me, she was just my Black American great aunt. But on the census, she was listed as mulatto. Is mulatto a term that they use when someone is just fair skinned, or does that really have some implications?
It could be both. Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, it could be it depends on who the enumerator was, who gave the information. If they were fair skinned, they could have been mulatto. In parts of Louisiana, they get real colorful with all the different terminology. There's a record, and I think I have this one in my queue to show you later next week. But my ancestor's named as her race is a griff, and I've never seen anybody called a griff. And I might be saying it wrong, but it was based on her fairness and how much Black and white they believe she had. So to help with those kinds of things, that's where I will say DNA testing has helped, because on that particular line of family and relatives, if she had, she was fair, but if she had been of European heritage and had European ancestors, I would expect to have a lot of European white DNA matches in my match list that link to that side of my family, and I don't. So it's not yet clear to me if she did have it. I mean, I have Nigerian Igbo friends that are the same complexion as me. So, it's important just to keep an open mind. It could be that, but it may not be that. When we're looking at these records, that's keep an open mind.
Gotcha. Thank you. Sister Kilgore, would you like to share? Would you unmute yourself, please?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I was able to trace my fourth great grandfather on my maternal side. And two of the things that came up on the census that I thought was kind of interesting, his children were listed as inferred children. Do you know what that term means?
So is that in an index, like what you're seeing on Ancestry, or is it on the
Yes,
physical record?
it's on Ancestry. It's not on the physical record.
Right. So what Ancestry is trying to do now is to make people aware that 1870, there are no explicit relationships there. People just took the man and the woman there as husband and wife, and all those minors were their children. And so they could be, they may not be. They could be adopted kids, they could be nieces and nephews, we don't know. So it's important, again, to just, again, say they could be, but they may not be.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that came up was the 1860 slave schedule. And he was, well, I'm assuming that it was him because it was the county that he was born in, which was Rockbridge, Virginia. And it had an empty walk-up, which I Googled who owned property in Rockbridge, Virginia. And while his name was not on the schedule, his exact age was on the schedule. So is there any way to pursue that, or am I just?
Well, when I see that, like, for instance, the record I showed you where I believe that it was could be my ancestor based on the age. The enslaver was a woman named Matilda Johnson. She was the wife of Benjamin Johnson, and they were very affluent in the state of Arkansas. They were not small change enslavers. They weren't we only had 2 or 3 individuals we were enslaving. They had a lot. They had a huge plantation. The only step I could take after that was to contact the Historical Society, try to contact, research that enslaving family. So research their family and see what records are, if there's anything in the archives about those families. That's really the only thing you can do. I think a lot of times some people just say enslaver and then there's a family relationship, and they were biologically related to, and that's not always the case, because I've not found any biological connection to any of the woman I believe was her enslaver based off of the 1860 census.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been good.
Thank you.
Trustee Michael Thomas, you're already unmuted. Would you please go?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. First, a question to my good friend Elora. The resource that you're using is ancestry.com?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. And to our presenter, and this is a very quick and brief question, there are a lot of different resources that you shared. If there's the quickest way to get census information is to do what? And the most direct?
I would say Family Search. I use that site a lot. It's free. They're doing some site upgrades and changes, so they're just have to adapt to that for me. But it's pretty easy to use and navigate around, like, their site. I don't really love Family Search for building your trees, because you can do that there. So I'm not recommending that. But for using, looking at those records, that site.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So there's a question in the chat, Adrian. Someone is asking, why does the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints compile so many records?
Well, I am not LDS. I'm not a Latter-day Saint, so I don't want to mess this up. But my understanding is it is for their faith. It is part. Family research is a huge part of their faith, and they do family research as a means of being able to potentially baptize those in the faith who maybe weren't baptized in Latter-day Saints faith, so that they can reconnect with them in the afterlife or whatnot. So again, that's a very, but it is part of their mission for their religious beliefs. So as a result, we get to benefit from all of the records that they collect and compile and stuff. And I know there's a lot of mixed feelings about that practice of baptism once a person is gone, but I definitely check in with someone from Family Search or one of their churches, and they'll be able to explain that much better than me.
Thank you, Adrian. And I do want to remind you all that for our culminating event, we want to gather together for our Black History Month Cafe so that you all can share really what you found, what you discovered throughout this month. So all of this is not in vain. We do want you to share, something you found new or exciting in your story, and even present your family tree if you were able to compile a family tree. And also, I want to remind you that we are streaming this on Facebook and YouTube. And so after we're finished here, you can go back and watch the replay if you came in late or just something you want to just go back over as you're doing your research. So I do want to share that with you. And if you want to register for our Black History Month Cafe, you can go on our website, www.mtolivebc.org, so that you can register for that. And when you show up for the Black History Month Cafe, you can also, whip up your favorite regional delicacy that you can eat while you're sharing with us, and, let us see what it looks like so we can be inspired to try it on our own. And also, I can't stress this enough. Every Wednesday after we finish with our discussion time, if you are connected with Mount Olive via emails, then you will receive the email with the weekly assignment. If you did not receive it last Wednesday, it means we don't have your email information in our system, in our regular system. So please, my brother and sister, please go on our website, mtolivebc.org. If you scroll to the bottom where it says connect with us, enter in your email information, whatever other information you want us to have, and then we will have your information so you can receive all of our updates for our time and study together. I do want to share a quick announcement. Pastor Victor wanted me to share with you all to definitely be praying for everyone in our community. Some of us are dealing with grief and loss, and so we want to keep Sister LaGreta Dennis and in our prayers. She lost her father. We want to keep Sister Kenya Allen in our prayers. She lost her uncle. The viewing will be Saturday, February 12th, out in Salisbury, North Carolina. So we want to keep them in prayer. And then the homegoing service will be on Sunday, February 12th, in East Spencer, North Carolina. We also want to pray for Brother Joseph Pollard, a former member of Mount Olive. Pray for his family. Brother Joseph Pollard has transitioned and gone home to be with the Lord. And that service will be on Wednesday, February the 16th at 11 a.m. in Temple Hills, Maryland at the Strickland Funeral Home. And so we want to keep him and his family in prayer. And Brother Raymond Lockett also passed away on Sunday. His service arrangements are pending. We want to keep Brother Lockett's family in prayer. And Brother Lockett is the husband of Sister Ardella Lockett. Lastly, Brother Pete Buckscale passed away on Saturday. His service arrangements are pending. So we want to keep all of our brothers and sisters that are dealing with grief and loss in prayer. We thank you all so much for joining us. We will be back next Wednesday at 7 p.m. on Zoom. It's not too late to register if you want to be a part of the interactive discussion. And thank you all so much for those who joined us on Facebook Live and YouTube. God bless you all. Please don't forget to work on your assignments as we continue on this journey of reclaiming our story. Have a blessed night and peace be